Canberra. This is, of course, after his delivery of the budget last night at Parliament House.
I'm President of the National Press Club. While every budget is an important event in the life of the nation, there's no question that the budget, immediately after there's been a change of government, generates particular interest, outlining, as it does, the economic and fiscal blueprint laid down by the new administration. Last night, the Treasurer unveiled that budget blueprint. Today, he's here to address the National Press Club. Please welcome the Federal Treasurer, Mr Joe Hockey.
Thank you, Laurie. To all of my colleagues and so many friends, thank you so much for coming along today to the National Press Club. Last night we did deliver a blueprint for the future of the budget, the future of the economy, and perhaps even the future of the nation. There have been many inputs into that budget. We had very detailed Commission of Audit. We had the wise advice of Treasury officials led by Dr Parkinson and finance officials led by Dr Tune. But at the end of the day, what brings a budget together is not just the information that is provided to us, but the values that we bring to the table. And as a Member of Parliament, you develop those values most often through your interaction with individuals in the community. Now, in front of about 600 of my closest friends here, I want to make a little confession to my wife. Over the last few months, there's been another woman in my life. She's 72 years of age, and her name is Margaret from Langwarrin in Victoria. Now, as a Member of Parliament, you get lots of mail, you get lots of emails, you get lots of people making pleadings. But she told me her story, sent some photos, and I was captured. And I rang her and had a chat. Margaret raised 4 children. She describes herself as a self-funded retiree, but she told me how much her income is, and you'd hardly suggest that she's totally self-funded, but she grows her own vegetables. Her husband lost his job in 1991. He was made redundant. People around her have been made redundant in more recent times from factories. And her message to me throughout the entire development process of the budget was be brave, be true, and remember that we have to forge our destiny. She told me her story about raising 4 children, trying to develop a business, losing businesses during the recession. And she said, be true to yourself, put in place the things that are going to grow the nation, because I am ready to do more. That's what she said. And the more I talked to her and the more that I engaged with her, the more I came to understand that what we have to do is build for tomorrow, and whether you are 72 or whether you're 4 years of age, like my youngest boy, or whether you're a little girl born today who is likely to live to 100, we have an obligation now to shape the future. And the budget, even though it is about numbers, and I'm sure I'll be quizzed and appropriately so on that, it is about people, about the sort of country that we want to be in the years and decades ahead. It is about the values that we impart. It is about the aspirations we have. And last night's budget was not forged out of the ashes of a terrible predecessor, even though that was obviously a key input. But the fact is, last night's budget was forged on the values that modern Australia embodies, the values of enterprise, of hard work, of self-reliance, of control of your destiny, of the fact that we've got to move away from a culture of entitlement in some areas to a culture of opportunity and hope. Last night's budget is forged for tomorrow, and we are asking Australians now to contribute. We're asking them to contribute. We can't force them. We don't control the Senate. We are asking them to contribute, because if we contribute now, we will build great things for our nation. And you can see that out of last night's budget. One of the astounding comments I saw this morning was that there was no structural reform in the budget. My Lord, no structural reform. Let's talk a bit about it. In education, we are deregulating the higher education system in Australia. It's long overdue. How could we possibly be in a country that does not have one university in the top 20 in the world? That's unacceptable to me. It must be unacceptable to you. We should aspire to be the best, to have the best. And clearly, the system is not delivering that. We should have more in the top 100. We've got a massive emergence of competition out of Asia. Well-resourced, well-funded universities that are attracting the best and brightest in the world, like honeypots. And we've got to compete with Asia. We take advantage of Asia and its massive growth, but we have to compete with Asia. Therefore, we've got to have institutions that can be even better, so that young Australians that go through those universities, they can travel the world and they can shake their degree and say, this is from one of the leading universities in the world. You know what? That'll improve their income, it'll improve their job prospects, and it improves our skill set in Australia. And of course, more people have got to have the opportunity to go to university, have an education. 20% of the fundings from deregulation are going to help those most disadvantaged to get to university. And students don't have to pay $1 up front, not $1. When they earn more than $50,000, that's when they start paying back for their university degree. And by the way, they're likely to earn $1 million more over their career than someone that didn't go to university. So it's a pretty good investment. It's a magnificent return on investment. And of course, there are others, the great bulk of the community that wants to improve themselves, to improve their capacity, undertake a diploma or a sub-bachelor degree. Well, we're going to extend the concessional loan system that applies to universities to them for the first time. So there's a quality of opportunity, not a quality of outcome, but a quality of opportunity, which is a core value of our side of politics. And we're going to go further. For people involved in trades, $20,000 trade loans. We're going to give them the same sort of opportunity as someone going to university, because ultimately it's often their hands that help to build the infrastructure of the nation. That's structural reform, but everyone talks about reform. That's structural outcomes, structural opportunity. How important that is. Because, as I said, there are people that have inputs, whether they be 72-year-old from Langwarrin, or in my case, my own children. I look at them and think, what are they going to do for the rest of their lives? What are their hopes? What are their dreams? That's what I'm focused on as a parent, or for their grandparents. That's what they're focused on. So we want to have the best education system we possibly can have. That's structural reform. And in health, like many members of parliament, you attend a lot of charity functions. You meet a lot of people that are doing it really tough. People who have had children that have been born with a disability. We've all got a member of our family that has been struck by cancer or dementia or Alzheimer's or heart disease. Whatever it may be, there's an affliction in every family, and probably it's going to affect you. So we can constantly increase funding for hospitals, and we are going to keep increasing the funding of hospitals despite some of the commentary. We are increasing the funding of hospitals. But we've got to find the cure. We've got to engage in one of Australia's great strengths, and that is to build a health system that is the envy of the world, not just today, but in 20, 30, 40 years' time. And the best way to do that is to invest in one of our great strengths, which is medical research. And the Medical Research Future Fund is not an option if we haven't got the money to fund it. And this is where we are asking people again to contribute, to build something that is going to shape the destiny of our nation. We're asking them to pay $7 when they visit a doctor. $2 of the $7 goes to the doctor. The other $5 ends up going into the Medical Research Future Fund, an endowment fund, the largest of its type in the world. Largest in the world. Hang on, this is Australia. We can be the best in the world at things. Sure, other countries may spend more money, but look at what we achieve in medical research. In the pound-for-pound blows with an Ian Fraser or Fiona Stanley or Gus Nossel or Howard Florey, who himself saved over 80 million lives with his engagement in the development of penicillin. We can do that in Australia because we have done that. But imagine if we give our people the opportunity to do even more. It could be an Australian that it invents the cure that saves your life or your child's life or your parents' life or many other lives around the world. But we've got to build something. And Australians are wise. They want to see that if they contribute something, they're building something. Well, here it is. If you want to have a better health system, if you want to have a health system that is going to make a difference, now is an opportunity to do it. By asking Australians to make a co-payment, by asking Australians to pay a little bit more for pharmaceutical benefits. That's the sort of thing that makes a difference, because every dollar of savings in health over the next 6 years is going into a $20 billion fund, but the money starts flowing out of that fund in just 18 months to 2 years. So we start building now. We start building now. That's structural reform. A focus on cure, a focus on discovery, a focus on finding a way to make sure that our quality of life is sustainable. And when it comes to welfare, the fact that we are spending more as a federal government on welfare than we spend on health, more than we spend on education, more than we spend on defence. And that's arguably the case, it should be so. But the fact is, we need the nation to help us in every area. If you exclude nearly 35% of the budget from making a contribution, you'll never fix the budget. Not when you have so many programs that are growing much faster than even the size of the economy over the next few years. So, we are making changes in welfare. And you know why? Because one of our core beliefs in the government is to help those most vulnerable in the community through our own personal endeavours, but also through our policy. And if we want to have a sustainable pension system in Australia, if we want to have a sustainable family payment system in Australia, or a sustainable childcare system, or a sustainable carer system, or a sustainable unemployment system, we need to make adjustments that ensure that the system meets the needs of the population, the changing demographics of the population. Because we're not 1910 anymore. We've got to build the infrastructure of government, not just for 2014 and the next 4 years, we've got to build it for the next 50 years. And if we all make a contribution in one form or another, that is going to make a difference. It means that our quality of life will not deteriorate. And that's the great risk, that it could deteriorate, particularly as we face emerging competition coming from our region. The welfare system was always intended to be a safety net, not a cargo net. It has always been the case that we have wanted Australians, and Australians have wanted for themselves, the opportunity to control their own destiny. It's one of our strengths. So I say to you, the changes we're making in the welfare space are focused on the sustainability of the welfare system. And when it comes to the economy, there's many things we need to focus on. Quite obviously, this year, next, perhaps even the year after, Australia is growing at less than what is normal pace, around 3.25% GDP growth. We're left with rising unemployment, going to 6.25%. We're left with falling terms of trade. Fact is, I never disputed it, the previous government said it, the economy is in transition. We had a massive amount of money go into the construction phase of the mining and resources boom. 80% of it came from overseas. And mining and resources represent 10% of the economy, just 2% of employment. But gee, they helped us out over the last few years with magnificent levels of exports and great returns. But now they've gone into the production phase. So all that investment is now coming on stream and we are exporting our socks off to the world. That's great. But the thing is, all those engineers and all those architects and all those brickies and logistics companies and everyone else who is involved in building the mining boom, they're no longer got that steady stream of work. So now we've got to move our effort over to the other 90% of the economy. We've got to start building the infrastructure that is going to lift the speed of that part of the economy that has been finding it pretty tough at various points over the last few years. And that's why we're rolling out not just a significant infrastructure package, but a smart infrastructure package. That's the difference. It's going to lead to over $120 billion of new infrastructure investment over the next few years, and it's starting now. The East-West program, the East-West Tunnel in Melbourne, is starting before the end of this year. The WestConnex project in Sydney is starting before the end of next year. And we've increased the funding for black spots and we've increased the funding for roads to recovery. We need to have cranes going all over the country. That's what the Prime Minister said to me, and we have to deliver. Because if we do not, in 2 to 3 years' time there is going to be a growth gap and unemployment will rise. So we need to start building things now. We need to get on with it now. And so much of what we've done is reorganise the interaction with the states and the private sector in relation to that infrastructure. We've been smart about it. We've recognised that we cannot have lazy capital, as you call it in the private sector. Many of you will probably be familiar with the term. We cannot have lazy capital in existing assets, when if we took that money out of those assets and then put it into new productive infrastructure, we'll create new jobs, we'll build a more productive economy. And the assets that we're selling, they're not going overseas. In fact, the big change over the last 20 years has been the emergence of superannuation. I give credit to the Labor Party, who started the superannuation scheme in its most recent form in Australia. But now we've got a tremendous amount of private sector money that is desperate to get into those sort of assets. The mums and dads of Australia really do want to own those sorts of assets. In many cases, it's like an annuity investment. So they're ready to roll. They want to buy more product. And the irony is, super funds are now investing overseas because they say there's not enough product in Australia. Well, we want to give it to them. We'll give them the opportunity to go after those assets, and we'll take the money, put it in a pot with the states, $5 billion, and say to the states, look, we're not allocating it on the basis of per capita or where you come from. We're all Australians. First in, first served, guys. If you take your money and invest it in new productive infrastructure and move quickly, and we have to approve the projects, if you do that, you'll get the bonus pool. But you have to move quickly. And that $5 billion is going to turn into $38 billion of new productive infrastructure. And then the states, that's the states. And then you've got the private sector on top of that. So you look at a WestConnex project where you've got seed funding from the Commonwealth Government. And you've got the Commonwealth Government being innovative, offering concessional loans to get WestConnex Stage 2 over the line, as I did 3 weeks ago. We're being innovative because we have to be, because we have to create jobs. We have to get the economy moving. We are absolutely determined to do that. As I said, we could have, if we were encouraged or we believed what some commentators said, we should go harder on the budget in the first few years. But if we had have, there would have been a price to pay. And we were not prepared to do that. But we have had to fix the budget. There's a fire in the kitchen and we can't stand idly by and not put it out. The tsunami of expenditure increases left to us by our political opponents was outrageous. The budget was never getting to surplus. The debt was going to $667 billion. Unsustainable. In my view, unsustainable because Australia is a net importer of money. I mean, people compare our debt to that of Japan. Japan funds itself and exports money. Australia imports money and has effectively done that since 1788. So we are hugely exposed to volatility in the rest of the world, and more so because we don't fund ourselves every year. We don't have the huge pools of domestic savings of the United States or of Japan. So we're more vulnerable. That's why, when you compare our debt to that of other nations, you need to think about the vulnerabilities associated with that debt. So out of our budget last night, we do reduce that debt burden. We do get the budget back to surplus. Most importantly for me, when I was in opposition, I addressed the National Press Club. I said to you, I'm always looking at the structural balance, what really happens under the figures. And you will see from the budget papers the structural change in the budget is significant. Takes us back to surplus. You know why we do this? Why we want to pay down debt? Why we want to live within our means? Comes back to the values. Because, you know, Margaret from Langwarrin says to me, I had to live within my means all my life. I want you to do the same. And I look at my children and I say, there's no way on God's earth I'm going to leave you with a debt, the money of which was used to fund my lifestyle, to fund my quality of life, and I'm not giving that to you. I will not do that. The government will not do that. It is not our way to do that. So I say to you, if individuals are saying what's in the budget for me, as I said before and I say again today, you may well be disappointed when you look at the benefit, the reduced benefit that you might be getting, the entitlement that may not be there, the contribution you may have to make, whether it be through the tax system or be it through the payment system. But you know what? As Margaret said, you never get anything if you don't put in the hard work. You're never able to get there and make a change unless you make a contribution. So we are asking the Australian people to make a contribution. and there'll be lots of political discussion, and there'll be lots of talk about this and that. The bottom line is, if we do not move now to fix the budget and to strengthen the economy, it is only going to get much harder. And you can kick the can down the road, but sooner or later someone is going to have to pick up the bill. And I would much rather it be in a position where we do the things now that are going to build a stronger Australia than pass the buck to another generation. So, ladies and gentlemen, this budget is based as much on values as it is based on the economic need. The values have been a key input. Very few of us hang around in politics for a long time just to spend so much time in Canberra. Not that I'm down on Canberra, but that's not a meaningful contribution. We actually come to this place to change the country for the better. And that's what the budget does. It changes the country for the better. Thank you very much.
Mr Hockey, thank you very much for your contribution today. Time now for the traditional round of questions from our media members. We've got a very, very long list. I would expect we may not get through it all, but I would appeal to my media members to restrict themselves, please, if you can, to a single question, so as many of your colleagues as possible have a chance to ask a question. We're going to ask Mark Kenny to ask the first one today.
Mark Kenny from the Age and Sydney Morning Herald. Thank you for your address, Treasurer. It's good to see you, sir. We haven't seen so much of you lately.
For good reason. For good reason.
Just days before the budget, just days before the election last year in August, the Prime Minister, or opposition leader as he was then, was asked whether the state of the budget would be used as an excuse for breaking election promises. He said that it wouldn't be. I'm just wondering if it's not the state of the budget that you are using to explain why a number of undertakings that were made before the election are being broken. What is your excuse? And if I could just breach Laurie's rule for a quick technical question, can you explain why the paid parental leave scheme is not listed as doesn't have its own separate budget item in the budget?
Well, on the second point, we are still negotiating with the states about the scheme, and as you know, we've reduced the threshold from $150,000 to $100,000 in relation to the PPL. I noticed that there weren't many journalists criticising us for breaking that promise, but it is in line with what we're doing in relation to Family Tax Benefit Part B, and essentially what we're doing in relation to Part A, Family Tax Benefit as well. And of course, because it interacts with state schemes, we are still negotiating the exact numbers with them. So, and in relation to the first point, Mark, a lot of the criticism of the budget is based on politics rather than economics. You said this, you said that. The most solemn commitment we made to the Australian people was to fix the budget. Now, one of the things that stunned me was the trajectory that was provided by the previous government in relation to debt over the medium term was based on an assumption that they only had 2% growth in expenditure over the medium term. We didn't know what that underlying assumption was because we didn't know what the real growth was. But the fact is they built in growth of 3.9% or 3.7% over the medium term into their expenditure. And the second thing is we've had to write down revenues between the pre-election fiscal outlook and the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook by over $37 billion. And people said to us, and our political opponents said, look, you guys are fiddling the numbers. Well, if we're fiddling the numbers, why is it the fact that essentially our revenue forecasts have been proven absolutely right in this budget? So I say to you, we now have a fire in the kitchen, as I said before. We have to put it out. And the most solemn promise we made at the last election was to fix the budget and strengthen the economy.
Our next question from Mark Simkin.
Mark Simkin, ABC News Treasurer. You've cut $80 billion from the states for health and education funding over the decade. Your mates in the states, the premiers, are now screaming. What do you say to them? And forgive the cynicism, is this a way of starting a debate about changing the GST? And given that Margaret from Langwarrin urged you to be brave, be true, do you believe that's a debate Australia has to have?
Well, we went to the last election promising that we would not change the GST. We are honouring that commitment. We also said that we would have a review of the entire tax system. We are honouring that commitment. Any changes that we are to take of great substance to the tax system, we would obviously take to the next election. The states receive every single dollar of GST. Every single dollar. When you look at the revenue numbers in the budget, you will see that over the next 4 years, our revenue, total revenue, is expected to be just fractionally higher than what it was in the mid-year update. But that increase is basically the GST, which flows directly through to the states. They're getting an extra $4 billion in GST over the next 4 years. Our revenue is actually falling. But Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard pretended that Canberra was a honeypot. So they signed up to bolt-on agreements, Gonski and hospitals. And those bolt-on agreements just had a huge increase in expenditure for hospitals and schools. No wonder the states were rushing. No wonder. And of course, we said at the last election we would fund 4 years of Gonski, and that was it. We were very clear about that. Hospitals, we said we would honour the health funding, as at that time, the health funding, but the fact is it's unsustainable. We don't run hospitals, we do not run schools. The states do. And if they want to have additional funding, bearing in mind that over the next 10 years we continue to increase in real terms our contribution to hospitals and schools. Keep that in mind. This is a bonus pool that was there, provided by Gillard and Rudd, and if they were going to keep doing it, they would have increased taxes, or they'd have to find a new tax to fund it. Now, the people that run the organisations can deliver them more efficiently if they properly fund the challenges associated with those organisations.
David Crowe.
Thanks, Laurie. G'day, Treasurer. David Crowe from The Australian. A couple of strands to the question, but I wanted to start with something Tony Abbott said this morning, which is that he didn't think crossbench senators would obstruct the budget because they wouldn't be willing to go to an election. First obvious question is, are you willing to go to an election? And one aspect of that is that you're cutting $30 billion from school funding, something you didn't tell voters about before the election. How do you think that will go down as a campaigning issue at an election over the budget?
Well, the first thing is we're cutting school funding as it was promised by Labor beyond the 4 years of Gonski. And just because the funding is not coming from the federal government doesn't mean the money isn't going to the schools. Don't make that assumption because, again, we do not run them. We are a third party in this transaction. So we collect taxes and then we give them to the states as a bonus payment, as if we're some sort of Santa Claus. But you know what? The money comes from the same taxpayer. It's the same human being that pays taxes at a state level and at a federal level. So we've got to do what's right. And we will do what is right. And if we stick with good policy, we'll be fine.
Just that question though, crossbenchers and the prospect of being forced back to the polls?
Crossbenchers and being forced, look, that's up to them, the crossbenchers. I don't have the capacity to psychoanalyse them. And I would not encourage anyone else to try.
Question now from Laura Tingle.
Treasurer Laura Tingle from the Financial Review. You've said that the paid parental leave scheme isn't in the budget. It's
it is. No,
it's in the contingency reserve because you haven't finalised a deal with the states. But the states might say on that basis probably the entire hospital funding system should also be in the contingency reserve because your budget's actually talking about taking away from the existing agreement, not just changing the agreement once it's finished. The premiers are up in arms and saying this is not just going to hurt their budgets but their credit ratings, and that you're basically outsourcing the deficit reduction task to them. How do you actually form another agreement with premiers, let alone deal with the question of breaking trust with voters, if they can't believe that you'll stick to an existing agreement that they've made with another level of government?
Well, the fact is we are honouring the 4 years of the agreements in both hospitals and schools that we said we would honour. We are doing that. We are doing that. And then we said that we're going to have a federation white paper and a taxation white paper that will look at the structure and the funding of the federation. And we're going to do that. Now, you know, Laura, I had one of my earlier careers, I was on the other side of the table working for a New South Wales Premier and wondering whether Canberra was going to give us money and how much they give, and they used to shove the notes under the door of the hotel the morning of the meeting. That was not a constructive way to engage in Commonwealth state relations, but you've also got to have a relationship with the states that is based on responsibility and accountability. And in our situation, we are saying to the states, you run schools, you run hospitals, you've got to pick up the extra money associated with the cost of running them if you have a different way of running them. And by the way, over the next 4 years, you're getting more money out of the Commonwealth Government, not just increased GST revenue, but you are getting a massive leak of infrastructure money that is going to your budget bottom line. So if you're worried about credit rating agencies, you know the best way to hold up your credit rating is to have a credible story, long-term story, about how you are going to grow the economy and at the end of the day, when a problem comes along, you need to work with others to fix it.
Malcolm Farr.
Treasurer Malcolm Farr from news.com.au. Can I assume that you've modelled the excise indexation of petrol, and specifically could I go to the tax on a tax effect, because twice a year under your proposal excise will go up and the GST will push price up further on that. When will we reach $2 a litre for petrol, which would mean it would cost something like $140 to fill a family Camry? And how much earlier would we reach $2 than if it was business as usual?
Well, Malcolm, let me put it another way. At one stage in the early years of the Howard government, taxes represented, I think, nearly 60% of the cost of a litre of fuel. Today it's around 25%. 25%. And yet the federal government has embarked on a massive road building program in the interim years. If we want to spend over the next 4 years over $11 billion in additional money on roads, then just over $2 billion comes from a 1 cent a litre in the first instance increase in the excise on fuel, which is about 40 cents a week for a family. 40 cents a week for a family. And the money by law is going into roads. Now, fuel prices are influenced by a whole lot of things. But I tell you what, if we've got better roads and we actually don't have the argy-bargy about how much you're going to spend on the Pacific Highway upgrade, how much you're going to spend on the Bruce Highway upgrade, this happens. Every government sort of comes in and says they're going to do it. At the end of the day, some of these roads are our roads. We've got to fix them. We've got to fix them. We've got to maintain them. We've got to fix them. And that's our contribution. Now, you don't get anything unless you pay for it. And in the case of roads, we're asking Australians to help us pay for it. Otherwise, we get the money out of other areas.
Tim Lester.
Treasurer Tim Lester from the Seven Network. Am I right in saying your justification for the deficit levy is as it was before the budget was outlined, in that you need to share the burden, the lifting to higher income earners, And if it is still that justification, doesn't it fail on two grounds? One, it's relatively small an impost on higher income earners compared to the imposts faced by those on welfare or on lower incomes. And two, it's an impost that'll only last 3 years, whereas the impost on those on lower incomes and reliant on welfare is permanent.
Well, hopefully it's not permanent for people who rely on welfare. And obviously with family payments, their children grow up. So the suggestion that changes in relation to family payments are going to have a permanent impact on people is just wrong. Because, you know, sooner or later, I'm told reliably, your children do grow up. And of course, that changes the entitlement to family payments. But you know what? Family payments are an income supplement. They are an additional payment from another taxpayer to you on top of your income. And if you have no income, you get a parental pension, which is paid by taxpayers, by someone else's taxes paying for your parental payment. So the family tax benefit is a supplement. We're not taking money off them because they've still got an income. And what we want to do is make sure they've still got a job and that they've got rising income. But when you go to a taxpayer, you're actually taking money off them. You're taking additional money out of their pocket. Money that was theirs, that they earned. And that's why you've got to be cautious about increasing a tax threshold or increasing personal income tax. And by the way, if you keep having constant increases in personal income tax, it starts to detract from economic growth. And a lot of higher income earners are more mobile, so you start to see your revenue fall as people try and reduce their tax. Now, a week ago, people were complaining that we were being too tough on higher income earners. That's changed a bit. It just goes to show that if we all make a contribution, we can make the difference.
Our next question from Kieran Gilbert.
Mr Hockey, Kieran Gilbert from Sky News. A quick scenario. Say you're a 25-year-old tradie, you've done your apprenticeship and your auto shop shuts down. You don't have any savings, you've worked hard, but you haven't been able to put any money away. You don't have a supportive family. How do you feed yourself for 6 months without the dole?
Well, the starting point is you would get a redundancy, and the taxpayer provides good taxpayer-funded concessions to people that receive redundancies. And if you didn't get that redundancy, if your employer was mean, there's a taxpayer-funded support system. It used to be known as GEARS, and that is there to provide you with a redundancy. And of course, after you get the redundancy, if you go into a Centrelink office, you will be able to have the 6-month waiting time reduced by a month per year that you have worked. In addition, we will help you get into a job. So we're going to be active about it, helping you to go into a job placement program. Now that is important. But you know what, Kieran, the best thing we can do is create an environment where another job is available, where there is an employer looking for an employee. That's the best solution. That's the best hope. But if that person wants to go and retrain, do a diploma, we'll provide a taxpayer-funded concessional loan. It's pretty good. And if they want to go and do another apprenticeship, we'll give them $20,000 through a taxpayer scheme to do that. Because we want them to earn or learn. Earn or learn. But there are safety nets in place.
Sophie Morris.
Sophie Morris from the Saturday paper. Treasurer, there's a focus on lobbying and influence peddling at the moment, and pre-budget season is one of the busiest times for lobbyists. What approaches do you consider are effective for interest groups trying to raise their concerns with government? And given the perception, at least, that money buys access, do you agree that more transparency might be required, perhaps along the lines of what Mike Baird has outlined in terms of publishing ministerial diaries?
Well, if I published my ministerial diary, it'd be meeting, 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 public servant, public servant, public servant. And I'm happy to document to Australia that I spoke to Margaret from Langwarrin. You know, I think people that tried to lobby me would probably be sorely disappointed with the budget. Didn't work for them.
Colin Brinsden.
Treasurer, Colin Brinsden, AAP. Yesterday morning, which seems a long time ago now, I asked you on your way into Parliament what the budget was going to do to help get unemployment down. Remember that one?
Yep.
And you said there was going to be a significant growth package in the budget.
Yeah.
Yet you've still got unemployment rising 6.25% as predicted by Labor. I mean, haven't you got faith in your own policy that you're going to get unemployment down? And
well, imagine what it would have been if Labor were re-elected. The fact is, we do have a growth package.
I hadn't finished.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Sorry, Colin.
And are you still confident of getting 1 million jobs created in the next 5 years?
Yes, well, yeah, the answer is yes, we want to do that. The second thing in relation to employment is this. The bigger the public sector, the smaller the private sector. So we want to try and get the private sector to go the extra steps. And that's hugely important. Overwhelmingly, I think at 6.25%, we can turn the corner. I am encouraged by the 5.8% that we've seen over the last few months, but there is still much work to be done. Now, we've got a falling participation rate because of an ageing population. If we had the same participation rate as we had a few years ago, the unemployment rate would be much higher. So what we've got to do is stimulate employment growth. And one of the initiatives that I announced last night, Restart, where we will pay an employer $10,000 to employ someone over the age of 50 who has been on a disability support pension or New Start for 6 months. That's about changing the culture of business towards older employees, but also it's about saying, hey, let's have a go. And the second thing is, if we do not consolidate the budget, what you will see is that monetary policy will eventually tighten much faster than it may do. And that's one of the challenges that we've had to address as well in our consideration of the budget.
Question now from Hugh Remington.
Treasurer Hugh Remington from Channel 10. You say your most solemn promise is to fix the budget, and yet two of the big nasties in this budget have nothing to do with directly fixing the budget. The fuel tax increases is new money for roads. The co-payment in Medicare goes to medical research. How do you explain that rhetorical disconnect, if you like? And a quick retail question, can you guarantee that that Medicare co-payment will not rise over time?
Well, the first thing is it's got to get into Parliament. The second thing is, you know, I remember someone standing before you and guaranteeing a surplus, and it didn't work out too well for him. So I'm not in the business of giving absolute guarantees forever and ever, amen. But what I say to you is that the saving associated with the co-payment is going into a health fund. That health fund will, in perpetuity, deliver money for medical research, for health, which in turn will strengthen the health system. Now, because it's going into a fund, it is initially a saving. But as the fund starts to spend, obviously that will go against the budget. The fact is, it's all part of the same pot in health.
Lenore Taylor.
Lenore Taylor from Guardian Australia, Treasurer. If the projected Commonwealth funding for hospitals and schools was always obviously unsustainable, why did you agree before the last election to the next 4 years of it, if not to sort of falsely reassure the states and voters that things weren't going to radically change? And if the states don't agree to increase the GST or broaden its base or raise their own taxes, what will happen to hospitals and schools?
Well, the states run hospitals and schools. As I said on Melbourne radio this morning, Victoria arguably has the best hospitals in Australia. That's not because of what's happened out of Canberra, it's because of what happened in Victoria, because they run the hospitals. Just to remind yourself, the hospitals and schools bonus pools, the hospital program and the schools programs from the previous government, they were bonuses. They were bonuses. As you'll see in the budget papers, our commitment to hospitals and schools keeps rising over the long term. But when it comes to actually getting involved in the day-to-day operations, like Gonski and like the hospitals agreement, we don't run one hospital. We don't employ nurses. We don't employ doctors. The states do that. It's a money shuffle as it is, where we just increase taxes at a federal level in order to hand it to the states and claim credit, because it all comes out of the same taxpayer. Now, what you're doing is suggesting that we should break our promise. Promise was to fund them for 4 years. We kept that promise, certainly in relation to Gonski. In relation to hospitals, we made it clear that if it were going to be the case, we have to come to an arrangement with the states. And we said that we're doing it. And we've got a white paper process in relation to the federation and taxation to deal with that.
A question now from Andrew Probyn.
Mr Hoggie, Andrew Probyn from the West Australian. I note that in the budget you confirm that, you reveal that you're going to actually accept the superannuation guarantee going to 9.5, partly because you haven't been able to get through the mining tax package or the repeal thereof. But can you, on that topic, not mining tax, super, can you tell us what the latest advice is to government about what an adequate retirement will require in terms of a superannuation guarantee, and what changes would be required to ensure protection of the pension by ensuring that people don't squander the superannuation when they're entitled to it?
Well, I'm glad you raised the mining tax. I'll come to super in a sec, but you're absolutely right. The mining tax has been a disastrous tax from Labor, and the problem was that they put all this expenditure against it, including changes to superannuation. And now they're refusing to support the repeal of a tax that, as the budget papers identify, it hardly raises any money. In fact, Matthias Cormann was telling me how much we're actually giving back to the miners. Back to the miners. That's a pretty good tax where they actually make money out of it. We don't make money out of it. So, and yet the Labor Party keeps defending the mining tax. It's extraordinary. At any rate, in relation to superannuation, we are giving good notice as we go along on changes in retirement incomes. For example, to go to the age of 70 from Labor's 67 to 70 in 2035, and we're giving good notice, 21 years notice, right? It's not bad. In relation to superannuation, we promised at the last election there would be no adverse changes to superannuation in this term of government. We're honouring that commitment. Currently, I have the Murray Review that is closely examining issues in relation to the financial system. It is also the case that we've still got the McClure report to come back on welfare, and we've still got work to do on retirement incomes, so that by the time we go to the next election, we have a retirement incomes package that provides a long-term plan, including simplicity in the system that ensures people can plan with confidence for the future.
Karen Middleton.
Treasurer Karen Middleton from SBS. You've applied a $7 Medicare co-payment now to GP visits. That would seem likely to encourage more people to go to a hospital emergency department when they're sick to avoid paying that fee. That also seems to support the argument the states are making about cost shifting. For the record, should people be able to go to a hospital emergency department for free now that they would have to pay a GP fee as an alternative? And should the states apply a fee to those visits to match yours?
Well, you're asking questions that the states should answer because they run the hospitals. We don't. We don't. But Karen, I mean, a lot of people pay to go and see their GP. A lot of people pay to go and see their GP. The question is, well, you know, if they couldn't get to see their GP, would they go to a bulk billing GP, or would they go to the hospital? Well, that's a behavioural aspect that I can't give you an answer on, other than the fact that we have safety nets in relation to the co-payment. We're asking Australians to pay $7, $5 goes to the Medical Research Future Fund, $2 goes to the doctor. There are also safety net provisions for doctors, very important, if they are to see the very most vulnerable who come in, don't have any money. And I don't think there's a doctor in Australia that say, sorry, you know, get out of here. I mean, our doctors are far beyond that. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why we're giving them the $2 payment. But it's also the case for some of the most disadvantaged in the community, like Indigenous communities. There are other item numbers that might apply, which means they don't have to have a co-payment, of course. But the fact of the matter is that surely we've got to accept personal responsibility for our health. Surely we do. I mean, you know, I've never been a particularly bright beacon of good health, but we all have to accept personal responsibility for our health. And if that means that where we can we have to make a contribution, then we should. And in so many other areas, people make contributions in other areas of their lives that are actually less important than the health of themselves or their children.
My apologies to those colleagues who have not yet had a chance to ask a question, but I'm afraid the next one will have to be the last, and it's from Tori Shepherd.
Treasurer, Tori Shepherd from The Advertiser. Do you accept that earn or learn is pretty cold comfort for those in the auto industry, particularly in the supply chain, who've just learnt that the ATS will be abolished early?
No, I don't accept that, and I'll tell you why. Because we have significant packages to assist with the adjustment associated with decisions made in the auto industry. The fact is, government is providing a safety net in both Victoria and in South Australia. Best thing we can do is have a stronger economy to give people the opportunity to get another job. And if they want to reskill, we're happy to pay along the way for that reskilling with concessional loans if they choose to do a diploma or associate diploma, whatever the case might be. But the fact is, and can we please focus on this, the fact is, if we do not fix the budget and do not fix the economy, there will be fewer jobs. People will have less income in their households, and then there won't be any taxpayer money to redistribute to them. Well, there'll certainly be less. So everything we are focused on is about strengthening the economy, creating jobs. Because we are facing great competition in our region. We are facing great competition around the world. When countries that have been sick over the last few years start to get their act together, it is a very real threat to us and our prosperity. So we can either be a victim of changed circumstances, or as a nation we can control our destiny. And this budget is about Australians starting to control their destiny.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please thank the Treasurer.